after the U.S. military's recent takedown of a Chinese spy balloon.
Beijing is admitting that a secret balloon spotted over America belongs to China.
Chinese spy balloon. Shootdown of China's spy balloon.
On today's episode of China Explained, questions answered about the Chinese spy balloon and the CCP's reaction to the U.S. shooting it down. China's oil demand is expected to shoot up, may result in reconsideration of the slash in output. Trial of pro-democracy protesters set to begin under national security laws. Before we begin the video, we request you like our video if you enjoyed it. This small gesture helps us immensely with the YouTube algorithm. Without any further ado, let's dive into today's video. A Chinese spy balloon was recently spotted over the United States. This has resulted in the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, postponing a high-profile diplomatic trip to China. However, the CCP claims the balloon is merely a civilian airship used mainly for meteorological research that went off course due to winds, with only limited self-steering capabilities. But the US says it is a Chinese spy balloon, without a doubt. The Pentagon says the balloon is carrying sensors and surveillance equipment. There also has been significant evidence suggesting its maneuverability. It has loitered over sensitive areas of Montana where nuclear warheads are siloed, prompting the military to take action to prevent it from collecting intelligence. The Pentagon and other relevant U.S. officials have reported the balloon to be the size of 3 school buses moving east at an altitude of 18,600 meters or 60,000 feet. Officials say that the Biden administration knew the balloon before it entered the U.S. airspace in Alaska. In the first public U.S. statement, Brig Gen Pat Snyder, Pentagon press secretary, said that the balloon was not a military or physical threat as an acknowledgement that it was not carrying weapons. And he said that once the balloon was detected, the U.S. government acted immediately to protect against the collection of sensitive information. Retired Army General John Ferrari, a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, said that even though the balloon may not have been armed, it still posed an enormous security threat. He added, "The flight can test America's ability to detect incoming threats and find holes in the country's air defense warning system. It may also allow the Chinese to sense electromagnetic emissions that higher altitude satellites can't detect, such as low-power radio frequencies that could help them understand how different U.S. weapons systems communicate." The Biden administration initially wanted to shoot it down, which was a sentiment shared by some congressmen. But the Pentagon advised against it as the move could prove risky, as it could harm the people and damage the infrastructure on the ground. Rep. Jim Himes, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, suggested that it could be valuable to try and capture the balloon to study it. "I would much rather own a Chinese surveillance balloon than be cleaning one up over a 100-square-mile debris field," Himes said. Now, if you listen to the 50-cent army on Twitter, or God forbid, stumbled upon some state-run news agency that we refer to as the CCP's propaganda machine, is there a chance that the CCP is telling the truth, and it is simply a weather balloon gone rogue? So, yes, regarding wind patterns, China's account that global air currents, known as the westerlies, carried the balloon from its territory to the western United States is plausible. This current is also responsible for bringing air pollution from Chinese cities, wildfire smoke from Siberia, and dust from the Gobi Desert sandstorms to the US for 2 decades. But then, how can one explain the balloon stumbling upon critical US infrastructure and nuclear missile silos, and why did it not wander around aimlessly throughout the US? And why did the Chinese officials not give a warning or any sort of message that a meteorological balloon was about to enter your airspace? This is also not the first time China has taken part in this primitive method of spying. As the Pentagon has confirmed, there have been other incidents where balloons came close to or crossed the US border. Still, he and others agree that what makes this different is the length of time it's been over US territory and how far into the country it penetrated. Craig Singleton, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, said Chinese surveillance balloons had been sighted numerous times over the past 5 years in different parts of the Pacific, including near sensitive US military installations in Hawaii. The high-altitude inflatables, he said, serve as a low-cost platforms to collect intelligence, and some can reportedly be used to detect hypersonic missiles. So naturally, the Biden administration decided to shoot it down once the balloons drifted outside the areas where it could cause damage, and they did it. To which the Chinese government said Saturday that President Biden's decision to shoot down the spy balloon that crossed America was an excessive reaction, and that it retains the right to respond further, in the usual wolf warrior manner. In the statement, The CCP also said China would defend the legitimate rights and interests of the enterprise involved. This, in essence, means that their spy equipment can enter other countries' sovereign territory, and the government isn't allowed to take any actions because Winnie the Pooh said so. And this is what is so dangerous about the salami-slicing policy implemented by China, is they get used to the lenient treatment by other countries, despite them committing blatant acts of war. But we digress. 2 U.S. Air Force fighter jets took out the balloon off the coast of North Carolina Saturday afternoon. By the time the white orb deflated and fell into the ocean, it had spent 8 days in the country and covered more than 4,000 miles of American territory. The Chinese side requested that the U.S. appropriately deal with this in a calm, professional, and restrained manner, said the statement from the Chinese ministry on Sunday. For the United States to insist on using armed force is an excessive reaction. This is when we'll take the time to ask any CCP official that stumbles upon this video where the restraint was when the Chinese aircraft repeatedly entered Taiwanese airspace, or when the Chinese Coast Guard forcibly seized the suspected debris of a Chinese rocket that the Philippine Navy was towing to its island in the South China Sea, or the countless other infractions. We believe the world should take firm action against the Chinese acts of aggression and make dictator Xi understand that his ego may be large enough to have its gravitational force, but the world doesn't rotate around him. Before we get to the trial of Hong Kong 47, let's take a brief look at the Chinese oil demand that may push producers to reconsider their output. Market in China, the world's largest crude importer and number 2 buyer of liquefied natural gas, has become the most significant uncertain factor in global oil and gas markets in 2023 as investors bet on the speed of its recovery after Beijing lifted COVID restrictions in December. Experts are expecting about half of the growth in global oil demand this year will come from China, and if the demand goes up very strongly and the Chinese economy rebounds, then it would force the OPEC plus countries to reconsider their output policies. Previously, the OPEC plus countries angered the US and other Western nations. In October 2022, they decided to cut production by 2 million barrels a day instead of pumping more to cut fuel prices and help the world's economy. The International Energy Agency's executive director, Faith Barol, said price caps on Russian oil have achieved the objectives of both stabilizing oil markets and reducing Moscow's revenues from oil and gas exports. He added that Russia's revenue likely fell by nearly 30% in January, or about $8 billion compared with a year before. G7 nations, the European Commission, and Australia this week approved a $100 per barrel price cap on diesel and a $45 per barrel cap on discounted products, such as fuel oil starting from February 5th. Barol said, however, that the fuel market balance could improve from the second half as more refined capacity is added globally. And now we finally move on to the trial of Hong Kong 47 under the national security law. This is one of the most significant cases concerning a group of pro-democracy legislators, politicians, activists, and community workers who have been charged with conspiracy to subvert state power under the national security law. This trial is supposed to start on Monday. They are accused of holding unofficial pre-election primaries, which the authorities say constitutes subversion. The primaries, a common feature of elections in the past, aim to select the strongest candidates to run against the pro-Beijing establishment parties. These elections aim to win a majority of the seats in the Legislative Council, but prosecutors have alleged that the primaries' plan to use this majority to block legislation and veto budgetary bills was a massive and well-organized scheme to paralyze the government and topple the city's Beijing-appointed leader. The whole case is built upon the hypothetical assumption the defendants might take. William Ni, a researcher at US-based Chinese human rights defender, says, "It is a clear-cut violation of the right to run for public office under international law. The prosecution of this group compromises mainly on high-profile democracy supporters, and this is Beijing's centerpiece of the CCP's crackdown on the opposition." Professor Zheng Qinghua, a social scientist formerly with the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, says that by elevating the pro-democracy politicians' supposed crimes to the severity of a conspiracy to subvert state power, Beijing is sending a message that opposition to Hong Kong and Chinese governments merits the harshest punishment. He added, "It aims to intimidate the pro-democracy camp so they daren't stay active as anything they do could constitute a serious crime." He says, "This is how Beijing's political crackdowns is reforming Hong Kong, and they will pull out all the stops to ensure there won't be any voices of dissent." The primaries were held just days after the introduction of the national security law, and over 600,000 people came out to vote as a show of defiance against the government crackdown on the fundamental rights of the citizens of Hong Kong. But the CCP decided to call it illegal just days after the primaries, and on the 6th of January 2021, arrested dozens of organizers and participants who were involved in a series of raids. The elections that the 47 had hoped to win were postponed, ostensibly because of COVID. They were eventually held after a Patriots-only overhaul of the electoral system, which effectively made it impossible for opposition candidates to run and win. The national security system has created a parallel justice system with less oversight and fewer rights and protections for defendants. The trial of the 47, which has faced significant and repeated delays, will also be judge-only after Hong Kong's Justice Secretary, Paul Lam, declared the personal safety of jurors would be at risk and said there were foreign elements involved in the case. Though the ongoing prosecution of media mogul and activist Jimmy Lai, the government and courts have ensured foreign lawyers can be banned from representing clients. Eric Lai says the executive branch's involvement in removing the jury from this trial and the prolonged pretrial detention of most defendants are among several aspects of the case that raise doubts of a fair trial and due process. Well, that's it for today. You know the drill by now. Please like, comment, and subscribe. It's a small gesture, but it helps us immensely with the YouTube algorithm. Until next time, peace.